Excellencies, Madam Special Advisor, dear colleagues, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the panel discussion organized by the Permanent Mission of Armenia to the UN, which will seek to address the role of technologies in the prevention of genocides and mass atrocities. Despite continuous efforts of the international community to prevent atrocity crimes and to fight impunity for those who commit them, sadly, such acts of extreme cruelty continue to persist and to be perpetrated in various parts of the world. Symbolically, April is a month that is linked with quite a few significant dates in history of genocide, beginning with the systematic killings of the Armenian, Greek, and Christian Assyrian population in the Ottoman Empire. The pre-planned state-sponsored massacres, which culminated in April 1915, resulted in the extermination of 1.5 million Armenians, prompting the prominent Polish lawyer of Jewish descent, Raphael Lemkin, to coin the term genocide. It was precisely in the historical context of the systematic campaign of violence against the Armenians that the modern term crimes against humanity appeared, used officially for the first time by the Allied powers in their joint declaration in May 1915, which represents the origin of the use of the term as the label of category of international crime. The report of the United Nations War Crimes Commission of 1948 not only contains details of the Armenian genocide, but also uses the events of 1915 as a historic example of categories of crimes against humanity and precedent to the Nuremberg tribunals. In 1985, the Subcommission on Prevention of Discrimination and Protection of Minorities of the United Nations Commission on Human Rights adopted the report on the question of the prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide, prepared by Benjamin Whittaker, which confirmed that the massacres of the Armenians in 1915 meet the criteria for the United Nations definition of genocide as one of the genocides of 20th century. It has been said too many times before that the civilized world failed to stop the Armenian genocide largely due to the lack of preventive mechanisms at the time. A century later, however, the ability of the international community to properly identify and react to such situations remained considerably challenged, as demonstrated by UN's tragic failure to prevent genocide in Rwanda. There is a range of detectable warning signs which precede genocides. Those, as we all know, are not events that happen overnight. They are long-term social and political processes that begin long before the actual killings. Hate speech, racism, discrimination, and dehumanizing public discourse are among the clearly detectable red flags, which, if left unaddressed, can lead to systematic violence that targets groups of people because of who they are. This is particularly relevant for societies where policies of racism and discrimination are cultivated by the state. In our own region, we continue to be faced with a dangerously mounting level of genocidal ideology, which has already caused devastation, wars in Nagorno-Karabakh with systematic incitement of anti-Armenian hatred and culminating with unchecked barbaric violence and mass atrocities against ethnic Armenians. Such was the case with the state-sponsored massacre of Armenian population in Sumgait and Baku back in 1988 and 1990, when violent mobs attacked innocent civilians on the streets and in their apartments in response to the peaceful democratic demands of Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. In similar vein, decades of incessant hate speech and dehumanizing rhetoric instigated massive demonstrations in the streets of Azerbaijan with thousands of people chanting "Death to Armenians." These were shortly followed by Azerbaijan launching massive military attacks amidst an unprecedented global pandemic in 2020 in gross violation of international humanitarian law and with numerous verified cases of atrocities. 2.5 years into the establishment of the ceasefire in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict zone, the UN and its humanitarian agencies are yet to render the much-needed assistance for a population of 120,000 people who have made hostage into an inhumane blockade that has essentially disrupted the only lifeline connecting Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia and the outer world. Not only the Lachin corridor continued to remain disrupted for over 4 months now, but as of earlier this week, Azerbaijan checkpoint was installed in stark violation of the previous commitments, as well as in contradiction to the order of International Court of Justice, indicating a provisional measure according to which Azerbaijan shall, and I quote, take all measures at its disposal to ensure unimpeded movement of persons, vehicles, and cargo along the Lachin corridor in both directions, unquote. This recent order issued by the ICJ on 22 February 2023 adds to the earlier measures indicated by the court back in 2021. To this date, Azerbaijan has failed to implement the court's legally binding orders, engaging instead in manipulative distortions and misinterpretations, while instrumentalizing the issue of the Armenian prisoners of wars and civilian captives, denying UNESCO's access to cultural heritage sites, and inflicting a medieval barbaric siege on the population of Nagorno-Karabakh. By now, it should be clear that Azerbaijan's actions are indicative of premeditated, carefully planned, and executed efforts that demonstrate an intent to destroy, in whole or in part, national and ethnic group as such. Colleagues, dear friends, this year marks the 75th anniversary of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Crime of Genocide. As we reflect on the challenges of the genocide prevention agenda, we are reminded that more often than not, it is the lack of accountability and perpetuation of impunity for previous crimes that breeds more violations. In this context, one of the important processes that is currently underway within the United Nations is the elaboration of a universally accepted treaty on preventing and punishing crimes against humanity, and we welcome the recent progress achieved in this regard. Armenia has been historically leading international efforts to underpin the significance of the Convention, including through a number of resolutions that we have initiated in the UN Human Rights Council and in the UN General Assembly, including most recently through GA resolution, which established the International Day of Commemoration and Dignity of Genocide Victims. Since 2015, Armenia has been hosting the Global Forum Against the Crime of Genocide, a thematic international platform which regularly brings together scholars, practitioners, and other stakeholders to debate methods of prevention. The role of digital tools and technologies in the context of genocide prevention was the focus of the latest meeting of the forum, which took place in December 2022, discussed the risks and challenges stemming from misuse of new technologies, including social platforms in the context of genocide prevention and countering hate speech, as well as the role of digital tools for protection of cultural heritage. Today's event will look on the deliberations of the Yerevan Global Forum and will seek to take the conversation further. I'm very glad that today we are joined by Ms. Alice Vairimun Derito, the Special Advisor of the Secretary General on the Prevention of Genocide, whom I would like to thank for her efforts and leadership in driving the genocide prevention agenda forward. I'm very happy to welcome the distinguished practitioners and scholars of genocide prevention, who I have the honor to introduce: Dr. Eliza Forgi, Endowed Chair in Holocaust and Genocide Studies, Keene State College, co-founder of Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention; Dr. Henry Theroux, Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs at Worcester State University; and Dr. Lori Khachaturian, Associate Professor, Department of Near Eastern Studies and Anthropology, Cornell University, and co-director of Caucasus Heritage Watch. I would like to express my appreciation also to Eliza for acting as moderator in today's discussion. To conclude, I would like to thank all present in this room, as well as those joining us online, as the event is being live streamed through UN Web TV. I'm also grateful to my team at the Permanent Mission of Armenia for their efforts in organizing today's event. With this, I have the pleasure to invite the Special Advisor to Secretary General to deliver her address. Madam Special Advisor, you have the floor, please.
And first, I would like to apologize. I would like to begin with an apology for coming in late. I had back-to-back meetings. We had an executive committee meeting with the Secretary General that was ending at 3 o'clock, and this meeting was also starting at 3 o'clock. And as soon as I was done, I ran down so that I could make it, but I was late, and so I'm saying sorry. And Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to begin by thanking the Permanent Mission of Armenia for organizing this panel discussion on an important and timely topic, the prevention of atrocity crimes in the digital era. This is especially important because in 2019, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, launched the UN Strategy and Plan of Action on hate speech, and he asked my office to lead as a global focal point for hate speech. So in today's digital world, new technologies have impacted on almost all aspects of our daily lives. And we know that this is from how we communicate, how we receive information, and how we acquire knowledge, and how we travel and how we work. So, and the positive impact of new technologies are many. They allow us to connect and should be celebrated. And we saw, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, how we were able to continue our critical work because of these technologies that keep us connected. However, these new technologies have also brought negative implications, some of which we're only starting to see or learn the impact of, including issues of right to privacy, online targeting and harassment, in an area that's especially important to my mandate as a special advisor on the prevention of genocide, the exponential growth we have witnessed in online hate and incitement. So such hatred, often targeting groups on the basis of their identity, have been used to incite discrimination, violence, and even genocide. It's therefore a topic that's high on the agenda of the office that I lead. So my mandate was created because of the failures of the United Nations and the international community to prevent and respond to the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda and in Srebrenica in the 1990s. And this year is an important year, the 75th anniversary of the Genocide Convention, the 1948 Genocide Convention, and that from which we draw my mandate, which is to monitor and raise alarm to the United Nations Secretary General, to the Security Council, to member states, and to other relevant actors on the risk factors of genocide and related atrocity crimes, by which I mean crimes against humanity and war crimes, as well as to provide recommendations and support awareness raising and capacity building on the prevention of these crimes. So the risk factors of genocide and related atrocity crimes are well known. We have set out the most common risk factors and their indicators in a framework of analysis, which we use as a basis for monitoring of our work. And such risk factors include, amongst others, the presence of an armed conflict or other forms of tension and crisis, widespread human rights violations, in particular against groups on the basis of identity, discrimination, dehumanization, hate speech, impunity, and weak state institutions to adequately respond to such trends. These risk factors build on the experience of my office, as well as extensive research of past instances of atrocity crimes. Indeed, history teaches us that the processes leading up to the commission of atrocity crimes features many of these same risk factors. And we saw this before the Holocaust, as well as in the years leading up to the genocides in Rwanda against the Tutsi and in Srebrenica. We also witnessed the same in more recent situations that my office has consistently highlighted. And it is the failure to respond to the risk factors that allows these crimes to still occur at the expense of victims. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I noted, there is no doubt that new technologies can play an important role in accelerating atrocity prevention. Indeed, they have brought immense benefits, connecting people across the globe, introducing life-saving devices, and making information more easily accessible to all of us. They've been used to document possible atrocity crimes, helping to preserve evidence and promote accountability for such acts. We have seen this type of documents documentation where the vast amounts of gross human rights violations and abuses that have been perpetrated in the conflict have reached the world through individuals documenting such violations at great risks to themselves. So violations and atrocities that might otherwise be hidden or denied by the perpetrators then come to light. And in addition, new technologies, including artificial intelligence and virtual reality, are excellent tools for memorialization and education about past atrocities, as well as to promote prevention. So we do know that new technologies have also been used to target vulnerable populations, including minority communities, as well as journalists and human rights defenders. And we've seen this in the extended use of online surveillance, as well as harassment and threats that many human rights activists and individuals belonging to minorities especially face online. So the rapid expansion of social media platforms across the world without the corresponding content moderation resources and capacities has resulted in the exponential spread of online hate speech and incitement to discrimination, hostility, and violence at a rate never seen before, contributing to division, violence, and in the most serious cases, atrocity crimes. So we repeatedly see social media being used to disseminate such hateful narratives against vulnerable populations, including against ethnic and religious minorities, refugees and migrants, women, LGBTI and plus communities and others. And often such narratives are instrumentalized for political gain, making those targeted even more vulnerable. So hate speech is often used to incite communities against each other. And we also know that hate speech can trigger atrocity crimes, including genocide. I want to emphasize that not all hate speech leads to genocide, but hate speech was present in the lead up to all the genocides we have witnessed. And so therefore we pay specific attention to hate speech. So action to combat hate speech needs to be integral to our efforts to engage new technologies. So my office, as I said earlier, is a UN focal point on the implementation of the UN strategy and plan of action on hate speech. And this strategy and plan of action seeks to enhance UN efforts to address the root causes and drivers of hate speech, as well as its impact on victims and societies. And so we coordinate system-wide efforts to counter and address hate speech, including by supporting UN field presences, member states, civil society to develop context-specific and national action plans on countering hate speech. One of the commitments of the strategy is to use new technologies and engage with social media to address online hate speech. And in this regard, my office engages with social media platforms to promote policies and practices on addressing online hate speech in line with the UN strategy. We've organized annually since the year 2020 roundtable discussions with tech and social media companies, Chatham House Rules, from Facebook, now Meta, Google, Twitter, TikTok, and quite a number of them. And last week I had a meeting with the small companies with Zoom, Twitch, Discord, all the small ones. And what we discussed is how to implement the UN strategy and the responsibilities of these companies in addressing hate speech on their platforms in line with international human rights standards. And these roundtables also include relevant UN entities that are part of the UN Working Group on Hate Speech, as well as the Principles Working Group on Hate Speech, which I chair, as well as special rapporteurs and civil society organizations working on this topic. So we are developing a policy guidance based on the outcomes of these roundtables that will be published in the first half of 2023. So, and we're doing so because we need to get to that space where we need to put out this information that we've been discussing under Chatham House Rules. The link between new technologies and atrocity prevention has been prioritized by the Human Rights Council in its resolution 499 from March 2022 on the prevention of genocide, for which Armenia is the pen holder. In the resolution, the Human Rights Council requests the Secretary General to present a report to the Council on the topic of the role of new technologies and their impact on genocide prevention. This report will be presented at the upcoming 53rd session of the Council. The Secretary General has already made harnessing the potential of new technologies as one of his key priorities, as reflected in the UN strategy on new technologies, as well as in our common agenda. So this year, marking the 75th anniversary of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, provides us with that opportunity to not only take stock of the impact of the Convention and its legacy, but also reaffirm our commitment to it by ensuring its universal ratification and its full implementation at country and regional levels, And I appreciate Zambia for being the country that last ratified this convention last year in July. So I'd like to conclude by re-emphasizing that we need to do more to understand and address the negative consequences of new technologies and social media on atrocity prevention. And as we move in terms of utilizing the benefits of these tools. So this can contribute to holding perpetrators accountable and mobilizing action to prevent further atrocity crimes from being committed. Excellencies, I thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Special Advisor. Sorry about that. No problem. I think it's working. Thank you. Thank you so much for those words. And I'm actually very happy to hear about all the work that the United Nations is doing related to digital technologies and the promotion of human rights and the prevention of genocide. And I hope that that does not make my talk out of date already. But I'm very happy to hear about these new initiatives. So thank you very much for your words. I would like to start by thanking Ambassador Marganian, and the Armenian mission to the United Nations for the invitation to speak today. It's a great honor to be on this panel and among such esteemed co-panelists and such an esteemed audience as well. And I want to start by noting, as Ambassador Marganian did, that this is Genocide Awareness Month, a very busy month for all of us who work on genocide prevention. And it's a month when we call attention, not only do we call attention to the continuing threat of genocide worldwide, but also we commemorate 4 very important anniversaries in the history of genocide. The 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, the 1988 Anfal genocide against the Kurds in Iraq, the Yom HaShoah, or Holocaust Remembrance Day, which marks the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and of course the Armenian Genocide Remembrance Day, which falls on April 24th, the day in 1915 when the eminent leadership of the Armenian community in the Ottoman Empire in Istanbul was rounded up and executed. So as I was preparing for my talk today, I was thinking about Genocide Awareness Month. And I was thinking a lot about how these genocides were committed in what we can call the analog era, right? Not the digital era, using technology that predated the digital era. Some of them used the new technologies of the age, of course, such as Zyklon B gas in the gas chambers, or the use of mustard gas and the nerve agent sarin on the Kurdish town of Halabja in 1988, but by and large, all of these genocides relied on tried and true methods of organization, communication, and killing. Bureaucracy, radio, telegraph, telephone, railroads, religious institutions, guns, farm tools, starvation, rape, and exposure. Despite their analog nature, 3 of the genocides that we commemorate in April were among the most lethal and certainly among the most total of the 20th century. And in many ways, I think that we can expect the same dynamic in the digital era. Digital technologies offer humanity the potential to create new means of committing genocide, certainly. But genocides will still be committed largely for the same reasons, using the same processes and technologies that have been used by human beings for centuries to commit this specific crime. However, there are a few ways that I can see in which new technologies may fundamentally change the shape and the outcome of genocidal processes. And this will have consequences, of course, on how we seek to prevent this crime. The first is that digital technologies, and Special Advisor Endurito mentioned this in talking about the right to privacy, but that digital technologies will change fundamentally people's ability to hide from the states and the non-state actors that have access to new technologies. In fact, new technologies already have challenged all of our traditional notions of privacy. Geolocation technologies, electronic trails, blockchain, satellite technology, facial recognition, retinal scans, infrared cameras, drones, All of these new technologies make it much easier for perpetrators to identify targets and much harder for targets of genocide to assume false and safe identities, to go into hiding, and to flee. There's some evidence that these technologies are not yet able to locate human beings in forests with dense coverage, dense foliage coverage. So that still may be an option for flight and hiding if that exists. But otherwise, these new technologies can find people very quickly anywhere they are in the globe. And this means that perpetrators will have new means to make genocides more effective and more total in their outcomes. The second way in which digital technologies may change the shape and outcome of genocide is that new technologies have the capacity to speed up genocidal processes. I think this is discussed a lot. Here we can think about new weapons technologies, such as nuclear weapons, for example, of course, but also cyber warfare that can shut down critical energy, communication, and food supplies through the use of skilled hackers. Less often discussed are new weapons such as hypersonic missiles that can fly at low altitudes and maneuver in the air, making them nearly impossible to track with current missile defense systems. Directed energy weapons that convert electrical and chemical energy into concentrated radiated energy and can focus that radiated energy on smaller targets, often with great precision, and they are often invisible. As well as new autonomous weapons systems such as what are called armed autonomous robots that can kill efficiency and without moral or ethical hesitations that we often find within human perpetrator. Although past cases of genocide have shown that we really do not need these directed energy weapons, these hypersonic missiles, or armed autonomous robots to efficiently commit genocide, interviews with survivors have shown us again and again that many people survive genocide because of limits to the lethal power of weapons, or because of moments of hesitation and even of mercy among individual perpetrators of genocide, no matter how infrequent that may be. The third way in which digital technologies may change the shape and outcome of genocide is that digital technologies can create the material realities that lead to new and larger identity groups being slated for destruction. So by spreading hate quickly and to places not immediately involved in identity-based conflict, for example, social media and the internet can involve people far afield in a genocidal ideology that is emerging in a specific place. And it can involve these same people in a killing machine then that they may not otherwise have had access to. We could think of the success of the global spread of what is called the alt-right across the world, which has identified a host of enemy populations and which is negatively influencing politics all over the world, from the United States to Italy to Russia to India. While we have seen this spread of fascism before in the world, it is currently much more integrated and coordinated than it once was, making it potentially a much more formidable foe than it was. The enemies of this new fascism are shared enemies across the globe. Jews, Muslims, immigrants, and LGBTQ+ people, for example, are among the enemies identified by this global movement of the alt-right. It is an ideology that is very adaptable to the stresses that many countries and societies are feeling in the 21st century, and therefore it is having an outsized impact in a world where people feel the old ideas are running out of steam and of usefulness. Another way in which digital technology is creating material conditions for genocide is through the enormous restructuring that the global economy has undergone since new technological developments began to transform market dynamics in a way that has increased inequality. Inequality within developed countries, inequalities between developed countries and the rest of the world, and inequalities within developing countries themselves. What we would have seen, of course, over the past decades is an increase in inequality. A new report by the Brookings Institute called An Inclusive Future, Technology, New Dynamics, and Policy Challenges examines the impact of digital technology on the global economy and on democratic institutions as a consequence. While the report suggests a very good reform agenda to ensure that the positive promise of new technology is realized and put to use to promote inclusive growth and development, as they say, the challenges are still quite formidable, since the new digital economy has created structural realities that are leading to ever greater concentrations of wealth. And here I just want to note, when I met with Pope Francis in 2017 about the ongoing genocides against the Yazidi and Christian and Kakai and Shabak Shia and other ethno-religious minorities in northern Iraq, one of his greatest concerns regarding the prevention of genocide in the 21st century was that genocide would become a normative means of disposing of unwanted people, that it would simply become the way we operate. And it is not hard to imagine, right, when you think that with over 100 million refugees and internally displaced people worldwide, vast quantities of today's humanity risk being seen as labor market redundant, as a drain on the global economy, and therefore as unwanted and unneeded people who may be quietly disposed of. So it is clear that we need a global reform agenda for genocide prevention that incorporates a deep analysis of how digital technologies are impacting our world, and that reaches beyond the usual prevention agenda to consider structural and systemic ways in which digital technology, for all its potential value, is also driving potentially genocidal forces. Thanks. It is to the credit, it is to the credit of the Armenian mission to the United Nations and the organizers of the Global Forum Against the Crime of Genocide that they are starting this conversation at the global level. So by way of conclusion, I wish to offer some thoughts about how we might begin crafting a global reform agenda for atrocity prevention that incorporates the potential threat posed by digital technologies. Because it must be stated, of course, that of the three threats I mentioned, all of them have some sort of solution within the domain of digital technology as well. So they are the problem, but also the potential solution. Militaries around the world are investing in research and development into new weapons systems, but they are also investing in research and development into the technologies that will protect them from these new weapons systems. So we can do the same using scholarship, law, and diplomacy rather than lethal weapons. And one of the promises of digital technology, I believe, is that it may offer us a way of somewhat sidestepping the problem of political will, or more accurately, in genocide prevention, the absence of political will in prevention. Currently, we are often reinventing the wheel each time we face a new crisis. Although our genocide prevention toolbox has grown immensely in the last decades, this has not yet translated into institutional transformations that would demonstrate de facto that we are learning from the past. So digital technology may render moot to some degree the problem of political will by offering us the opportunity to track and verify atrocities with a speed and accuracy that we have not been able to achieve through other means. We can similarly use digital technology to track the spread and development of genocidal ideology, genocidal practices, genocidal laws, and genocidal organizations and groups before they reach the atrocity stage. Combined with early warning protocols, such as the Framework of Analysis for Atrocity Crimes, artificial intelligence and other digital tracking systems can help create a global early warning system that highlights and tracks red flags for genocide and that is automatically and even-handedly applied to all states, avoiding the perception of bias which currently haunts all of our efforts at prevention at every step. There are already similar systems tracking conflict more generally, but none that I know of that specifically track red flags of genocide and other atrocity crimes. So I believe this is what we need. This is one next step. And of course, human interpretation will always be necessary. Any framework or system we develop will have its problems, its limits, and its blind spots. So the task of early warning can never be left entirely up to technology and AI. Nevertheless, a global system using new technologies could produce a more scientific and distanced alert system, which could then potentially provide the foundation for an automatic and even-handed rapid response. We always talk about this, a rapid response that focuses the energies of new institutions and new agencies on particular states and regions, and makes it clear to states and armed groups that they are not operating in either obscurity or impunity. Such a system would be beneficial to states, multilateral institutions, the media, and to threatened populations, offering up-to-date information as well as a prevention toolbox that is at the ready and does not need to be reinvented each time a crisis arises. Given the number of genocidal crises we face in the world today, in Ukraine, Nagorno-Karabakh, Myanmar, China, Syria, Ethiopia, and so forth, there is not the attention available to respond adequately and responsibly to each. So such an operating system would, of course, require a great deal of resources. And we know that genocide prevention is a remarkably under-resourced goal. But given the threats of extinction faced by our species now with the climate crisis and so many other problems, we can hope that in the future there will soon be less money for war and more money for peace. And even in the present day, however, low-cost and easily accessible digital technologies can help with early warning, giving grassroots groups and grassroots organizations the tools that they need to better document what is happening to them and better communicate with the outside world. So to return for a moment to the Brookings Institution's policy paper, An Inclusive Future ? I would like to end by noting that our greatest successes in genocide prevention will rest in our ability to create societies that place human security, broadly understood, at the center of their politics, their economies, and their cultures. Any digital efforts to prevent genocide will need to be pursued within such a larger, broader reform agenda that includes the global grassroots as well as today's political, cultural, economic leaders at every level. Thank you very much. Thank you. And now I would like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Henry Theriault, who is Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs at Worcester State University and also Professor of Philosophy at Worcester State University. Please, Henry.
Thank you so much, Elisa. And first, let me comment on how honored I am. Oh, thank you. How honored I am for someone to actually know how to use the mic. That's a great start. But how honored I am to be here today with the members of this panel. I will start by saying I'm so excited to be in a program with Professor Hajidorian for the first time. Her work is very, very important and is opening some new avenues. I'm excited to hear from her. It is always great to connect with Special Advisor Nderitu and to see the work that she's doing. And we have to recognize that genocide prevention starts with the UN. That's where the convention started. That's where the work has always started. And the UN has, since even before the convention, has been the leader in dealing with these issues. And if we're going to move forward as an entire humanity, the UN is going to be the driving force. And we are so privileged to have Special Advisor Nderitu as the person who's at the forefront of that. Her level of activity coupled with incredible insight and I think genuine commitment has made a huge difference, I think, moving forward. And I'm already learning. I'm excited about the new initiatives, learning by being here. So thank you so much. Elisa and I started our collaboration, I would say, our interlocutation in 2009 when we shared a panel for the first time at an International Association of Genocide Scholars Conference. And I have been learning from her ever since. Her insights have ranged over so many different issues, starting with understanding sexualized violence through the whole innovative ways of looking at Lemkin's contributions to genocide prevention and so forth. And again today, new things that I'm learning as well. And I just want to say I'm very fortunate to have that relationship with you and to continue to learn. And finally, Ambassador Magarian, who is not just in the UN a leader on this issue, but has had a big influence, I think, in Armenia and in Armenian political circles in broadening the discussion. It is very easy for a victim group to focus on its own issues only. It's natural to do that. For many victim groups, the threat or the challenge of survival is so great that every resource they have, every bit of emotional energy has to go toward that. But what we're seeing with Armenia, and it's certainly following the amazing Holocaust scholars, for instance, and often Holocaust survivors who became Holocaust scholars, who pioneered the field of comparative genocide studies, opening to Armenia, to Cambodia, and to case after case after case. We're seeing Armenia doing this, and we're seeing other groups. If anyone's been, for instance, at the Kigali Genocide Museum, you will see a very intentional effort in Rwandan society to contextualize the Rwandan genocide in the broader history of genocide against people, and especially in the 20th century. And group after group is doing this. And I think this is a very important development that moves us away from advocating for particular victim groups to the bigger question of genocide as, and I would hate to say, I'm sorry to say this, as one of the norms of political, military, and even cultural activity that we have seen not just in the 20th century, but going back far into human history. I want to just contextualize what I'm going to say by saying when we talk about digital technology, and I will talk about things like social media, let's not forget that everything is digitized today. Okay, if you have a water heater in your home, it's digitized. Your car has a computer that can be shut down remotely. Military weapons, it would be hard to find a purely analog military weapon system, but also those depend on communications technology that are completely digitized. In fact, I just found out at my university for an event that we were having where we have old walkie-talkies, remember those before cell phones? They're all digitized now, so old analog equipment doesn't work on the networks and so forth. So everything is digitized, so even when we're thinking about machetes, how they're manufactured is part of a digital revolution, how they're distributed and so forth. And so that's part of the challenge we have, is that this technology is so powerful and so all-encompassing that when we start to pick away at different things, we realize there's always something else that's a challenge beyond it. Now, maybe a little bit more cynically than my other panelists, my first thesis is going to be that technological developments in recent years, as well as over the course of recorded human history, which has been very much a history of genocide, as much as it's been characterized by positive scientific, cultural, ethical, and political advance, have neither increased nor decreased the impact of genocide on humanity. This is not because new technologies, sophisticated computers, rudimentary artificial intelligence, innovations in airborne vehicle design, communications technology and innovative uses, battery advances, and more have not increased the potential level of productiveness per individual perpetrator, or the ability to gather immediate information from anywhere in the world and disseminate it across the globe to rapidly deploy intervention forces to make use of deep intertwining economies among states and non-states across the globe and so forth to limit genocide. If technological advances have increased the overall incidence, intensity, and effectiveness of genocidal projects, they have also balanced this with increasingly effective tools for successful prevention and intervention. Unfortunately, the reverse is also true. The better we get at prevention, the better we get at using the tools, and that's not to say that we shouldn't be doing what the UN is going to be doing to try to address this. The more that perpetrator groups use the same tools effectively to circumvent the new approaches we've taken. Naive or ideologically driven assessments of the level of violence in history find increases or decreases at different points, often in line with uncritically accepted views of history or political or intellectual agendas. Those shocked by the level of genocide in the 20th century against Europeans, Christians, and so forth, typically conveniently ignored the similar levels of destruction against indigenous peoples in the 15th through the 19th centuries. While those such as Steven Pinker, claiming that the world is less violent today than ever before, certainly have never asked any of the hundreds of current victim groups or looked at the rates of things like domestic violence and sexual violence across the globe in coming to that conclusion. As the foregoing suggests, quite often perceptions of a net increase or decrease in mass violence result from skewed data in which some victims are privileged or excluded. In some cases, technological tools impact on one side or the other of their balanced tension, positive versus negative impact on genocide. It is difficult to conceive of a use of drone warfare as anything but destructive of targeted groups. At best, two sides might engage in a kind of mutual destruction of each other's civilian populations. But more typically, as in the 2020 invasion by Azerbaijan of the Armenian area of Artsakh, military drones are available only to those with wealth and power in the international arena and are freely used against those without it. Drones represent a particular risk of genocide. Unlike nuclear bombs, they do not kill indiscriminately and at such a distance that mass murderers have no interaction with their victims. Unlike machetes and machine guns, on the other hand, they allow the killers to act with complete impunity. As philosopher John Cagg points out, drone operators do not assume any risk. That is, they function without the kind of moral hazard that can cause them to limit their destructive behavior. But more than this, the ability to kill at a distance with somewhat accurate targeting and no risk of a new kind of relationship, creates a new kind of relationship between killer and victim, a maximization of the power differential while still retaining, and this is very important, an individualized direct connection to the victim. If, as I have argued elsewhere, the ultimate driving force behind widespread participation in genocide, once material motives and propagandistic manipulation are accounted for, is an enjoyment of power over other human beings, then drones are a perfect fit to the psychology of genocide perpetration. If quite different from the usual dehumanization model, it is in fact the opportunity to gain a kind of superhuman superiority over victims that makes genocide so attractive and enjoyable for perpetrators, then drone violence offers a new and unique means of achieving that kind of superiority. On the other hand, some tools favor genocide prevention and intervention. We want to remember that, as things can be very daunting, as well as post-genocide justice and non-repetition efforts. And we sometimes forget how important non-repetition against the same victims, but also serial genocide, what I've termed serial genocide by the same perpetrator against different victims is. Forensic computing techniques that allow tracing of hate speech, and we've discussed this a bit already, and preserving of digital evidence of atrocities provide a new kind of advantage in the struggle to anticipate and intervene against genocidal processes, as well as, very importantly, to hold perpetrators accountable so that they do not continue to benefit from their destructive actions, they are denied an opportunity to repeat them, and their punishments deter would-be perpetrators, generally from other groups, from pursuing their own mass atrocity projects. Other technological tools can be used both for genocide and against it. Social media can be exploited to foment and even organize genocidal perpetration, as the Myanmar military's extensive use of Facebook has demonstrated. At the same time, social media can be used to communicate details of genocidal and potentially genocidal processes in remote areas and areas where perpetrators have the means to prevent traditional information conduits from functioning. For instance, the use of video and streaming technology has allowed the Uruwawa people of Brazil to document the invasions of their land for the entire world to see, bringing scrutiny and outside support that never would have been possible otherwise. And I would point you to a film a colleague of mine, Paula Mora, was one of the producers of, The Territory, which has become a global, a very acclaimed film globally, to see some of this in action and to understand the contemporary dynamics for this particular group, but with the implications for other groups. This does not mean that the relationship between genocide supporting and genocide mitigating use of technology is symmetrical. And I was misleading with what I first said because it's not symmetrical. As they have with every other innovation in genocidal practice throughout history, perpetrators have an advantage. First, they can mobilize technology in ways that serve their purposes before those who would resist genocide are aware of those possible uses and the need to respond to new techniques of genocide. Second, technology can go beyond being a simple tool for a prior intention to commit genocide. Recalling the discussion of drones, the impunity and power that come with drone use can mold operators to a greater tendency towards genocide than they otherwise would have had. For these reasons, the anti-genocidal mobilization of technology is always reactive to and a step behind at least the pro-genocidal use. The result is an analog to an arms race. Those resisting genocide must maximize their use of technology because failing to balance each advance supporting genocide will result in greater and greater violence, more frequent violence, more intense violence, and more effective violence. This brings me to my second thesis. If technology is neutral in relation to genocide, then prevention of, intervention against, and justice for genocide depend on something else beyond mobilization of technology. And I think this is another place where I have learned from Elisa and that I think we connect here. Technological advances will not automatically bring us closer to the ending of genocide. This forces us to confront the same question that has been central in legal, political, and scholarly discussions of genocide for more than half a century. What indeed is the key to prevention of and intervention against and even justice for genocide? It is easy to respond that the past failure to answer this question in a way that has actually reduced the incident, intensity, and impacts of genocide means it is not answerable. And if it is not answerable, we are in trouble. But there is a lesson to be learned from the discussion here of the relationship between technology and genocide. There is no special panacea or advance that will end genocide. Just as advances in communication and information technology, weaponry, etc., support an asymmetry between perpetration of genocide and resistance to it, so all legal, political, and similar advances have supported the same asymmetry, though with a reversal in the order of positive and negative advances. As I have argued recently, even political advances in the early modern period resulted in recognition of the right to life, the right to practice a religion of one's choice, and other rights that tended to mitigate genocide and other human rights violations. The shift from subject to citizen, to put it in Etienne Balibar's terms, French philosopher, we'll add him in here, enabled a new kind of centralized political structure with populations organized through state-driven ideologies that resulted in widespread and deeply committed participation at levels never before seen in projects of domination that would never have had the success in previous eras because of this shift. And over the last century, as laws protecting human rights, including most notably the UN Genocide Convention, have been developed, and more recently actually enforced, a miracle in its own right, on some occasions, at the same time that has happened, perpetrator groups have become more and more adept at maneuvering within the legal realm and manipulating legal gaps and limitations, such as liberal evidence standards that privilege perpetrators over victims, to the point where arguably the most prominent scholar of law and genocide joined the defense team of a perpetrator state recently and pursued a definitionalist denial of genocide in a way that supported the perpetrator's ability to continue violence, whether one wants to call it genocidal in a technical way or not, against the target group, simply because a manipulated legal process has prevented the genocide label from being applied to this violence. The simple lesson here is that each type of human advance in its heyday that had the potential to work against genocide opened the door to balancing support for the perpetration of genocide. If the order is reversed and that many technologies were developed with militaristic and related goals, still the only way to tip the balance in the favor of prevention, intervention, and justice is for a decisive movement to take control of the means of genocide perpetration in order to stop their use in this way. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Terrio, for those wonderful remarks. And we are going to, I'm looking at the time now, and we are going to turn now to Dr. Lori Kachadorian, who is an associate professor in the Department of Near Eastern Studies and Anthropology at Cornell University and the co-director of Caucasus Heritage Watch. Please, Dr. Kachadorian.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to Ambassador Margaryan and the Mission of Armenia to the United Nations for the opportunity to be here today. It's truly an honor to be in the company of such an esteemed panel this afternoon. I'm also happy to continue the conversation begun at the 4th Global Forum Against the Crime of Genocide in Yerevan on new technologies and cultural heritage preservation in contexts of genocide and other atrocities. Several themes emerged from the panel on cultural heritage at the 4th Global Forum. The fateful decision to remove cultural genocide from the Genocide Convention, several panelists noted, continues to haunt the present, limiting possibilities for recourse and accountability for both past and current episodes of cultural erasure. Our panel also revealed that despite successes in documenting cultural genocide, we have yet to devise effective mechanisms for its prevention. Nevertheless, new technologies are enabling new forms of representation that can support post-genocide rehabilitation. For example, we learned how a well-designed virtual reality platform, such as one developed in Iraq for the Yazidi genocide, can evoke social sympathy for the victims. VR can also recreate the spaces of mass atrocities, such as Holocaust concentration camps, to preserve this dark heritage for educational purposes. Building on my own contribution at the Global Forum, today I'd like to discuss the strengths and limitations of satellite technology as a tool for documenting cultural genocide and related forms of erasure, for detecting early warning signs, and for deterring future abuses. Documentation, detection, and deterrence each have distinct temporal frames. By documentation, I mean constituting evidence of what happened in the somewhat distant past. By detection, I mean constituting evidence of what is happening in the present. And by deterrence, I mean harnessing the results of both documentation and detection to shape decisions in the future. I will explore these three processes using examples from the work of Caucasus Heritage Watch, a research initiative that colleagues and I launched in the aftermath of the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh War as a program in what we have come to call heritage forensics, an approach to cultural heritage that operates at the intersection of archaeology, law, cultural aerospace, and politics. The proliferation of satellite imagery over the past 2 decades has created new opportunities for researchers and civil society groups to document and expose cultural genocide or its early warning signs. Even as some governments retain privileged access to the highest resolution imagery, there have been 3 important developments in recent years that have elevated satellites as powerful tools for documentation, detection, and deterrence. First, the availability of 21st century high-resolution satellite imagery through open source platforms or commercial vendors. One of the drawbacks of these resources is that the timing and frequency of image capture is outside the user's control. Second, commercial vendors are making it possible for users to task satellites to capture images on demand. This can allow for more timely detection than is possible using open source platforms, but it comes at a considerable financial cost. And third, despite its lower resolution, Declassified Cold War satellite imagery is making it possible to determine the condition of cultural heritage sites in the 1970s and 1980s, thereby allowing researchers to document cultural erasure that occurred decades ago. So let me begin with documentation, again using the examples of my own work. CHW, my research team, recently concluded a year-long forensic investigation into the fate of Armenian cultural heritage in Nakhchivan, an autonomous republic within Azerbaijan. Indications of heritage destruction in Nakhchivan began to leak out to global audiences in 1998 when eyewitnesses observed tombstones of the vast medieval Armenian cemetery of Julfa being excavated by a crane and loaded onto railroad wagons. The dismantling of the cemetery spanned many years. Video and photographs from December 2005 show Azerbaijani soldiers destroying its last vestiges. The eradication of the Julfa cemetery was followed by reports of wide-scale destruction of medieval and early modern Armenian cultural heritage in Nakhchivan, but site-by-site evidence was lacking. We launched an investigation in which satellite imagery played an indispensable role. For each monument, we compared imagery captured by the KH-9 hexagon platform, a photographic reconnaissance satellite maintained by the US government between 1971 and 1986, with 21st century high-resolution imagery. This allowed us to assemble an exhaustive site-by-site inventory that shows the complete erasure of 108 Armenian monuments between 1997 and 2011. This figure represents 98% of the Armenian cultural heritage sites we were able to geolocate and assess. Now let me note just two key findings drawn from our report and interactive website, Silent Erasure. First, satellite images show that the goal of the destruction in Nakhchivan was not simply ruination, but complete obliteration. In most cases, the land on which the Armenian monument stood remained a vacant plot, without a trace of the building that once stood there. In some cases, mosques, official buildings, or national monuments were erected directly atop the foundations of an erased Armenian site. This is the case here. We can advance the slide. At the monastery of St. Tovma or St. Thomas. Here, the monastery is clearly visible in a 1973 hexagon image, as you can see. By 2009, however, if we advance slide, St. Thomas is gone, and in this 2021 image, we see a mosque which opened on the monastery's plot in 2014. The second distinctive feature of the silent erasure in Nakhchivan was its totality. Virtually the entire inventory of Armenian cultural heritage was targeted, demolished, and expunged. Indeed, the program was pursued with such bureaucratic rigor that we documented several instances in which bulldozers were deployed into already abandoned, ruined, and remote mountain villages to surgically take out the ruins of Armenian cultural heritage sites. For example, the village of Nerkin Anzur was already a crowd of ruins by 1973, as you can see in this Cold War hexagon satellite image. Most of the village's ruins remain extant today, except for a single structure that has been erased, the ruins of the 11th, 12th century Armenian church. The same is true in a village called Mijin Ankuzik. Our investigation would not have been possible without the declassified images that provided a baseline of the monuments in the late Soviet period and the new satellite imagery that attested to their obliteration. But we also discovered certain limitations of the technology for the purpose of documentation. For instance, the resolution of images was at times inadequate to discern small features like partially buried tombstones, medieval tombstones. And sometimes tree cover or image distortion made assessment difficult. Apart from technical limitations, satellite technology is also insufficient for the work of documentation. For instance, in our case, to understand what the corpus of Armenian monuments was and geolocate each monument precisely, we relied on Soviet topographic maps, academic publications, and consultations with historians and archaeologists. Researchers who use digital technologies to document cultural genocide and related abuses must also acquire deep knowledge of the context and work with a wide range of scholarly and spatial sources. Let's turn to detection. If satellite documentation involves recording what happened in the distant past, satellite detection entails sensing an event roughly as it unfolds. Detection is necessary in contexts where cultural erasure is actively underway or where the threat of such atrocity is real. Satellite detection is infused with a sense of urgency, and it requires different tools than those discussed so far. So let us return to the Caucasus for illustration. In the aftermath of the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh War and the resulting transfer of territories to Azerbaijan, it was clear to observers that Armenian heritage sites within the ceded territories, essentially all the points on the map that you see here, were at risk, threatened by the same policy of zero tolerance for Armenian historic remains that we documented in Nakhchivan. Since spring of 2021, we have conducted a sustained program of satellite monitoring of over 260 Armenian monasteries, churches, cemeteries, and other cultural sites at risk. Our assessment of the risk derives not only from early warnings, about which I'll say more in a moment, but from old warnings, the warnings of the archive, the warnings of silent erasure carried out decades ago in Nakhchivan. In other words, satellite documentation can sometimes inform the need for satellite detection. The urgency of satellite detection cannot be met by open source or declassified satellite imagery platforms because it requires up-to-date imagery whose frames and frequencies are controlled by the researcher. Here we turn to our third technology source, namely tasked satellite imagery provided to us by Planet Labs' SkySat constellation. So tasked satellite imagery allows us to monitor the condition of endangered sites multiple times per year. CHW has to date documented 7 destroyed sites, 8 damaged, and 16 threatened since the Nagorno-Karabakh War began in September 2020. Let us look at an example. On the left, thank you. On the left, you see a historic Armenian cemetery in the village of Medz Taher or Buyuk Talar. In June 2020, the wooded cemetery is crowded with plots and memorials. The tasked image at the right, captured in April 2021, shows the area reduced to a gray earthen smear, a slash of the bulldozer clearly visible amidst the churned earth and dislodged burial markers. The demolition took place during road construction, but imagery from subsequent tasking missions show not only the wreckage of the cemetery, but also the proceeding roadwork, which in its final form barely impinged on the territory of the former cemetery. It appears that road construction provided the opportunity for the targeted destruction of the cemetery. Satellite detection entails this form of time-lapse analysis along the time span of a destruction event as it is unfolding. It is a powerful method that operates through a complex interrogation of images. No 2 images from our terabytes of data are the same. Images differ by season, by time of day, by cloud cover and atmospheric conditions, by off-nadir angle of image capture, and by a host of other variables. But the most insurmountable limitation of satellite detection is the inability to detect changes to vertical surfaces, and thus to identify acts of vandalism, erasure of inscriptions, or damage to decorative features, which are also tactics in the repertoire of cultural erasure. Finally, deterrence. Satellite-based deterrence entails detecting heightened threats to cultural heritage before destruction takes place and disseminating the findings in an effort to dissuade state or non-state actors from future destruction. Can satellite detection identify early warning signs and prevent abuses from taking place? This is a relatively uncharted area in cultural aerospace that my colleagues and I are currently exploring. We release alerts on social media and in our reports when we observe heightened threats. The most typical threat that has emerged in the ceded territories of Nagorno-Karabakh is the gradual approach of bulldozers closer and closer to historic buildings. In the villages of Madaris and Arachish, road work graded earth within a couple meters of the 19th and 18th century churches. We have released multiple threat warnings for several structures, including the 19th century Holy Mother of God Church in Taravart, where successive snapshots capture a slow process of earth moving that came closer to the doorsteps of the historic structure. It may be years before we can assess whether preemptive alerts based on satellite technology can deter state and non-state actors and prevent cultural erasure. At the very least, the efficacy of satellite deterrence will depend on whether governments, journalists, international agencies, and activists pay attention and respond not only when images reveal shocking acts of destruction, but when they offer relatively undramatic views that may foreshadow what could happen next. Deterrence is the unknown frontier of satellite monitoring, and it is where my colleagues and I will continue to focus our efforts into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Kachadorian, for that very, very important presentation. We have, oh, so sorry. We have about 8 minutes left, and I am wondering, we can open up to the panel questions that can be posed between one another, but I would like to give the special advisor a little more time to talk about some of these new initiatives that you mentioned, particularly monitoring capacities and the work that your office is doing in identifying risks and early warning signs. So I would love to hear more from you about that, please.
You speak when your turn comes at the United Nations. This is a side event organized by a permanent mission of Armenia, so you better respect what we're doing, okay?
Thank you.
Which will not arrive.
Thank you very much. Please, Mrs. Special Advisor.
Thank you. I thank you for the opportunity to speak again, and because I had to run through the speech, I wanted to emphasize that this year marks the 75th anniversary of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, and that I had said so earlier, but I didn't emphasize the role, the support that we require from member states, regional organizations, and civil society in terms of ensuring that we look at this day from that perspective. And at the same time, this resolution 499 from March 2022 on the prevention of genocide, for which Armenia is the pen holder, that it provides for us an opportunity to do much, much more on the prevention of genocide. Excellencies whom I have met before, who would be in this room, know that I'm always asking for friends, that who are my friends in terms of prevention of genocide, which is something that we should not be asking for when we know how often the UN has said never again, and how often we keep asking that for this kind of support. So in that regard, we do need support from member states, regional organizations, and civil society. And I would also like to say that in respect of some of the issues that have been discussed at this panel, at this table, that I do echo the statement of the Secretary General, who recently took note of the orders of the International Court of Justice issued on 22nd February in the proceedings between the Republic of Armenia and the Republic of Azerbaijan. And the Secretary General welcomed the trust that the governments of Armenia and Azerbaijan have placed in the International Court of Justice by asking it to resolve their differences, and that he recalled that decisions of the International Court of Justice are binding and trusted that the parties would implement its orders, including the order related to measures to ensure unimpeded movement of persons, vehicles, and cargo along the Lachin corridor in both directions. And so, like the Secretary General, I'm expressing the hope that Armenia and Azerbaijan will continue working to improve their bilateral relations and strongly encourage a constructive dialogue. Thank you, Excellencies.
Thank you very much, Special Advisor, for those words. You have a question?
I actually
Dr.
do have
Terry
one
Rowe?
for
Terry,
Professor
please.
Hachidorian.
Yeah.
And this may sound like an academic question, but I think for many people in member states here, this actually has a lot of relevance. If you look back at the development of the UN Convention and this decision for very political reasons, not good legal or intellectual reasons, to remove or to set cultural genocide to the side, it turned on an assumption that there is a clear line between so-called cultural genocide and so-called physical genocide. I think especially when we look at genocide of indigenous peoples, I think if you look at Australia as a good example of a state that in many ways has tried to come to terms at least with some of the cultural aspects, it's really hard in practice to find that line. And I would say in practice as well that quite often cultural destruction becomes intertwined with physical destruction or destabilizes the victim group to such an extent that they become very vulnerable. Can you comment on that? Because you're focusing obviously on artifacts from historical cases, but is that line there, or is it just, are we creating a legal fiction that is problematic and even harmful to groups?
I think that was a mistaken judgment and that line can't be starkly drawn because the destruction of cultural heritage is the destruction of a group's identity. And once you've eliminated a group's identity, you've effectively eliminated the group. So I'm not an expert on the convention and the basis for the decision, but I can comment that it does, when the work that we're engaged in, we understand to be more than merely the preservation of stones and old buildings. We understand that the stakes are much higher than merely the fetishistic kind of preservation of architectural history, and that speaks to the false judgment that underlies that stark distinction.
Madam Special Advisor, as a representative secretariat, allow other members to speak.
Ms. Special Advisor, we are going to give the floor to Ambassador Margarian to wrap up this session.
Well, thank you very much, and I would call, thank you very much to the participants and to the panelists for this very important interventions, and I truly want to appreciate the presence of all colleagues here. I even will want to thank the Azeri delegation who took the time to come here in person. I hope that their participation at the prevention of atrocity of crimes event, they will draw some lessons from that, and will certainly also they will heed the call of the Secretary General to, as the representative of their country, to follow the order of the ICJ and do not challenge this at the international fora. Well, I thank you very much for participation. I'm sorry about the disruption, and this meeting is concluded. We are at 4:30. Thank you very much.
I would say shameful is the number of journalists that are jailed in your country for trying to exercise freedom of speech in your country. Maybe attend to them before you complain about freedom of speech in other examples, other places.
Why would you let me speak then, if you're in such favor of freedom of speech?
You organize your event as much as you want.
You can't come here and accuse my country.
Oh yeah, no, thank you. No, you answered it great. No,